You're listening to the Co-Creator Network. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hey, everybody. This is Maxine Taylor with another edition of Move Into the Magic, and I am so thrilled to present to you a man who truly needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because his credentials are impeccable. Nick Pope, author, journalist, and TV personality, ran the British government's UFO project for 21 years at the Ministry of Defense. In the course of his career, he served in a number of different posts, but is best known for work on the ministry's UFO project. What he did was investigate sightings, looking for evidence of a potential threat to the defense of the UK, or anything of more general defense and or scientific interest. As you might expect, most sightings turned out to be misidentifications of ordinary objects or phenomena, but a small percentage remained unexplained. Nick was initially skeptical, but his official research and investigations convinced him that whatever the true nature of the sightings that remained unexplained, the UFO phenomenon raised important defense, national security, and air safety issues, as well as being worth looking into from a scientific perspective. He was particularly interested in cases where the witnesses were pilots or where UFOs were tracked on radar. Nick Pope retired from the Ministry of Defense in 2006, his last posting having been as an acting deputy director in the Directorate of Defense Security. Boy, that's a mouthful. He now works as a journalist and broadcaster, and he specializes in the unexplained, conspiracy theories, sci-fi, space, fringe science, defense, and intelligence. He is the best-selling author of 4 books, one on UFOs, one on alien abductions, and 2 sci-fi novels. He also investigated alien abductions in crop circles and was involved in work to evaluate whether the government should recruit psychics to undertake intelligence work. When details of Nick Pope's formally classified work were released under the UK's Freedom of Information Act, the media called him the real Fox Mulder. Nick Pope left the Ministry of Defense in 2006 after a successful 21-year career and is now recognized as one of the world's leading experts on UFOs, the unexplained, conspiracy theories, and what I'm going to put in quotes, fringe science. He does extensive TV work and has also worked with Hollywood film companies to promote various alien-themed sci-fi movies. He works with a wide range of film companies, TV networks, and production companies, helping develop ideas for new movies, TV shows, and documentaries. He contributes regularly to various news programs, chat shows, and documentaries, with appearances on shows including Good Morning America, Larry King Live, Geraldo at Large, The Joy Behar Show, Campbell Brown, and Nightline. He's been interviewed on TV news shows on CNN, ABC, Fox News, NBC, and, of course, the BBC. And he's appeared as contributor on numerous UK and US documentaries on networks including Discovery Channel, History, National Geographic, Sci-Fi, and the BBC. He works with various Hollywood film studios and media companies, helping to promote sci-fi films, video games, and advertising campaigns themed around the unexplained. He's worked for clients that include Microsoft, 20th Century Fox, 7-Eleven, and Sony Pictures, and he's been involved in promoting movies such as Super 8, Battle Los Angeles, Paul, The X-Files, I Want to Believe, and the remakes of War of the Worlds and The Day the Earth Stood Still. Nick Pope lectures all around the world, has addressed the Oxford Union and the Cambridge Union Society, as well as speaking at the Royal Albert Hall, the Science Museum, and Global Competitiveness Forum 2011, where other speakers included President Bill Clinton and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Nick Pope lives in San Jose, California, and in Tucson, Arizona, depending on the time of year. Now, if you would like more information on Nick, I'm going to give you his site because we may not have time for me to get back to it later on. His site is nickpope.net. That's NICKPOPE.net. Nick Pope, welcome to Move into the Magic.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on the show. Gosh, I think I need to write a shorter biography next time.
Don't change a word. Well, you know, the older we get, the longer our bio becomes. I had to cut mine in half and then in half again, which should give you an idea of how old I am. Anyway, moving right along here, I want you to do the talking. UFOs are my passion. Ever since I was a little girl, I've been excited about them. And without going into my background, because this is your time to speak, please tell us, how did you first get involved in the subject of UFOs?
Well, it was through my government job, and you mentioned in the introduction the fact that I worked on the Ministry of Defence's UFO project. And before that, I really had no interest in the subject. I'd never had a sighting or an experience. I don't think I'd ever read a book on the subject. I might have seen the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but that was about it. So I really came into that particular government job with no preconceived ideas or beliefs or opinions. And I think, looking back, that was maybe the best way to come in. I was neither a skeptic nor a believer. I just went in with an open mind. And what I found had a profound effect on me. I think it really did open my eyes and my mind to a subject that had previously not really concerned me at all. And again, as you said in the introductory piece, most of these things, of course, turned out to be misidentifications. But there was a steady stream of them over the years that appeared to defy any conventional explanation. And the cases that most interested me were the ones where, for example, UFOs were seen by police officers, pilots, military personnel, and where there was something over and above the eyewitness testimony, impressive though some of that is. But, for example, when UFOs were tracked on civil or military radar systems, performing sometimes extraordinary speeds and maneuvers that seemed way in excess of anything that our own aircraft and drones are capable of. Or when, for example, you've got a photo or video that the department's technical experts could analyze, enhance. And, you know, when these people turned around and said, well, we don't know what we're looking at, but it's a real solid craft, it's diamond-shaped, it's 25 meters in diameter, and it's got no conventional propulsion system, wings, fuselage, markings, anything like that, but it's real, then cases like that absolutely stumped us all, and of course were incredibly intriguing. And although that was a job that I did, in fact, for only 3 years out of a much wider 21-year government career, at the end of that 3-year tour of duty, I thought this was far too interesting and important to turn my back on it, and I stayed involved in a private capacity.
Wow. Wow. Well, of course, I have 1,000 questions to ask you where that took you, but let me start by asking you what aspects of the subject most interest you. Please and tell us, perhaps in your studies, what blew you away? What surprised you and shocked you and just took your breath away?
Well, I think one of the things that surprised me was the sheer volume of this material. And when years later, and perhaps we can come on to this later, but when the British government declassified and released its UFO files, 55,000 pages of documentation was released. And that, I think, gives you and listeners just a scope, a sense of what we're dealing with here. Not just a few isolated reports here and there, but literally tens of thousands of reports and all the follow-up in terms of the research, the investigation. And another thing that I think would surprise a lot of people, and it surprised me, was how highly classified some of this material was. I mean, clearly the raw data, if you're talking about just sightings from members of the public when someone sends in a report, that, of course, is completely unclassified, and very often people will go to the media with their stories anyway. But some of the things going on behind the scenes were stamped, and again, this isn't just my say-so. You can go on to the Ministry of Defense and the National Archives website and read some of this material for yourself. Some of these documents were stamped secret UK eyes only, which is a very high level of classification. So I think there are lots of surprises when you look at the UFO phenomenon. I think people have this rather cliched idea of the lonely country road late at night and a vague light or shape in the sky, to find out that these things are seen over cities, to find out that sometimes we're talking about structured craft seen at incredibly close proximity by military personnel. All of this, I think, turned my perceptions on their head and very much changed my worldview. As to the aspect of all this that most intrigues me, I think coming at it from a government background, I can't help but be intrigued by the science and technology involved in some of this. And if we are talking about craft capable of speeds and maneuvers that we can't match, are we talking about some exotic energy system, some quantum leap propulsion system, for example, that at the moment our own science and technology can only guess at? And what's the source of this technology? Are we, as some people believe, talking about extraterrestrials? Are we talking about time travelers from the future, something from other dimensions? And I like this idea of where science meets fringe science and where that segues into science fiction. And I've written 2 sci-fi novels, as you said in your intro, and I'm attracted by the idea, which is an absolute fact, that very often we've seen how yesterday's science fiction is today's science fact.
Absolutely. Oh, without question. And I think, as I said, once you have seen a UFO, your first, when it makes its first appearance into your life, I think your life, if you're interested in UFOs, of course, is changed because you see them everywhere, particularly on the full moon, particularly at night, and over Air Force bases, that type of thing. Can you tell me, I am assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, I am assuming that besides reading the data, that you yourself have observed a UFO in action. Is that correct?
Sadly, it's not correct. I have never seen anything myself. No, it's it's one of the great ironies that having investigated, I suppose, literally hundreds, if not thousands, of cases for the government, and having researched this subject both officially and now in a private capacity for decades, I have never seen a single thing or had any sort of anomalous experience. But, that could change today. And very often, of course, when I was interviewing UFO witnesses, I would be getting someone's life story, and they would say, well, I went for years and years, never believed any of this, never seen anything, and then bang, this happened. And I mean, some of those people, I remember particularly one great case from 1993 where we had a wave of sightings across the UK for a period of about 6 hours. I remember speaking to an Air Force officer the morning after, and I tell you, his voice was still shaking. He'd seen a huge triangular-shaped craft pass slowly over the military base where he was stationed, and then suddenly, from a speed of maybe no more than 40 miles an hour, this thing suddenly accelerated away to the horizon, many times faster than a military fast jet. And I mean, he said to me, Nick, he said, I've been 8 years in the Air Force, he said, and I simply don't know how to deal with this. He said, it's just outside my belief system, it's outside any frame of reference that I've got in anything. And this was a man who routinely saw fast jets, so was very much used to hardware and high speeds, and yet he was completely blown away by this sighting.
Oh, I can imagine. I can only imagine. You have remarkable scientific data that, for anyone needing proof, I would turn to you. I would send them to you because you clearly have the background, the information, and 55,000 pages worth of information if needed. I am very interested in your books. You've got 4 of them, one on UFOs, one on alien abductions, and 2 sci-fi novels. Nick, will you tell us a little about them?
Sure. The first book on UFOs was called Open Skies, Closed Minds, and it was an overview of the UFO phenomenon, but with a particular focus on my official government work. The second one I wrote was called The Uninvited, and that was about the alien abduction, alien contact mystery. Then I did 2 sci-fi novels, Operation Thunderchild and Operation Lightning Strike. And what I wanted to do with those was blend what I knew about UFOs with what I knew about crisis management, war fighting, and the whole political and military and intelligence community intrigue, the world, that world that I'd been a part of. So that's what I did with that. And in fact, I've just written a 5th book called Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, and that's really only been out for a few weeks. And that tells the story of the Rendlesham Forest incident, a case which I think is, at the moment, second only to Roswell in terms of perhaps its importance and the extent to which the public are aware of it. But I think because most, if not all, of the primary witnesses to Roswell have now passed away, the Rendlesham Forest incident is fast becoming the UFO community's flagship case. So I teamed up with 2 of the United States Air Force witnesses at the heart of this encounter, and we collaborated on this book, Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, and I'm very pleased with it.
Oh my goodness! Please, for those people who are not familiar with this incident, would you please? I don't want to give the whole book away, of course, but will you please explain why it is, for obvious reasons, replacing the Roswell incident? As you said, in Roswell, most of the witnesses are no longer with us. But will you explain the importance of this incident, what happened there with the eyewitnesses, etc.?
Well, the reason I think this case is so important is that it's almost what I call a perfect storm of a UFO case. Anything that, and everything that makes a UFO case compelling is bundled together in this single incident. And now this took place in December 1980 in the United Kingdom, but involving two United States Air Force bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Now, they're very close together, and they're separated by a wooded area called Rendlesham Forest. Now, over a series of 3 different nights, there was UFO activity. And on the first night, we're not talking about, again, lights in the sky. A structured, apparently metallic craft actually landed in the forest and was seen. In fact, Jim Penniston, one of the 2 witnesses at the heart of this incident, got so close that he touched the side of this thing. He sketched strange symbols on the side of the craft, which are a little bit like Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the UFO subsequently took off. When they went back with other military personnel to this landing site, they found, sure enough, indentations in the ground where this thing had apparently come down, and whatever it was had weighed several tons because the ground was pretty frozen and hard. But this was in a small clearing, and all around the edge of the clearing, the faces, the sides of the trees that were facing the clearing were all burnt and scorched. Whatever this thing was had been throwing off a huge amount of heat, and not just heat, but radiation too, because they took out a Geiger counter, and the government assessment of the radiation levels was that they were significantly higher than the average background. Now, the UFO was then seen on a subsequent night, and then on a third night, it came back again. It didn't land on this occasion, but on this final night of activity, the witnesses included the deputy base commander himself, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, who is probably the highest-ranking military officer to see and report a UFO whilst on duty. And he was with a team of military people who were out investigating what had happened on the first night when they got caught up in their own sighting. So it really is everything that makes a case compelling is found in this one incident. The UFO was tracked on radar. There's a paper trail of British and American documents confirming all of this in writing, and there's no dispute about the provenance of these papers. Again, you can read them at the National Archives and on the Ministry of Defense website. They're the real deal. And they show one fascinating postscript to all of this is that the senior United States Air Force general in Europe flew into the bases shortly after this, was briefed on what had happened, and took various items of evidence back to his headquarters in Germany. All this, remember, at a time when officially the position of the United States government was that UFOs were no longer even being investigated. So we've got an absolutely astounding series of incidents backed up by dozens of reliable military officers, many of them at high rank, and the paper trail too. So it's a phenomenal case.
It really is. How do you compare it to the Roswell incident in terms of importance?
Well, I think it is more important. I think, sad to say, with the passing away of the majority of the primary Roswell witnesses, and just with the sheer passage of time, I mean, Roswell is not far off being 70 years into the past. And I think, once something passes from living memory, it really just becomes almost history. And unlike Roswell, so far as I know, all the Rendlesham Forest witnesses are very much still alive and with us, and they're networking together through the internet, through Facebook, through other social media sites in a way that the Roswell witnesses never could. Many of the Roswell witnesses carried their stories individually up until old age, and no one ever got to put all the disparate pieces together. But with Rendlesham, and particularly with my teaming up with John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, two of the witnesses at the heart of this on the first night, I think we've really tried to put into the public domain a vast amount of information that was previously not known. And new witnesses as a result of the book are coming forward. So I think, as I say, this is becoming now the UFO community's flagship case. And I can count about maybe half a dozen TV documentaries on UFOs that have looked at Rendlesham in the last couple of years. And I know of at least two more currently being made that should be out later this year or early next year. So it's not just the UFO community, but I think it's the media and it's the TV networks that are perhaps waking up to the fact that it's Rendlesham Forest, not Roswell, that now represents our best opportunity for cracking this mystery wide open.
Well, I agree with you. For the reasons you've stated, I think you're right on. My question, I have all kinds of questions based on the information you've shared. The Rendlesham Forest incident took place in 1980. That was a while back. Of course, now we have the Internet. Now we have instant coverage, practically, of UFOs. People in Las Vegas, people in New York City, people all over the world, in fact, who, with their eyes to the skies and their cell phones handy, are taking pictures, videos of incidents, or at least of sightings. And I'm sure there are things that are still private, but is there anything more recent that follows on the heels of the Rendlesham Forest incident?
Well, I think some of the cases that come to mind are the big Phoenix Lights incident, for example,
right,
where UFO was seen over a major city. I mean, Phoenix has a population of, 5 million people? There are hundreds of reports out there. I know that because UFOs are notoriously underreported, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, more people in and around Phoenix who saw something too. So, I mean, that's, I think, a absolutely fascinating case. That was a wave of sightings, of course, from 1997. 2006, there was the famous incident where the UFO was seen over Chicago O'Hare at the airport, again hovering for several minutes before shooting off at very high speed. There was a case from 2007 where a pilot of a small aircraft, a commercial aircraft, saw a massive cigar-shaped UFO in the vicinity of the Channel Islands between the UK and France. Some of the passengers saw it too. Another pilot in the area saw it. And air traffic control were briefly tracking an uncorrelated target, as they called it. Unknown traffic, I think was the phrase they used, on the radar system. And the pilot said that this object was 1 mile long.
Wow.
So, there's a whole wave of sightings. But, I mean, you mentioned the Internet and people's cell phones. That's a blessing and a curse. I think the problem we've now got is almost information overload. There are so many photos and videos of UFOs out there. Almost a daily stream of videos going up onto YouTube, that firstly, it's difficult to stay current. And secondly, of course, there are some very skilled people out there who do enjoy showcasing their CGI skills and making some very convincing fake photos and films. So it's difficult, I think, for people outside government and the intelligence community who maybe don't have access to some of the sophisticated imagery analysis programs and expertise that the Air Force, for example, do. It's difficult to tell what's real and what isn't. So, I mean, back when I was doing the British government's investigations on this in the early 90s, the problem was we didn't get enough photos and videos. Now the problem is we've almost got too much. So it's the old signal to noise ratio problem.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think the problem, I agree with you, I think the problem is distinguishing between what is real and what is not. Because there are great magicians out there who can alter videos. So I certainly understand that. Let me ask you this, have you interviewed people who have actually been contacted? I'd rather call them contactees than anything else, or who have experienced contact with our brethren from outer space. And that may be way off your radar, but I'm asking because so many of our listeners are interested in that.
Oh, I've met and interviewed dozens of people, maybe even around 100, who claim to have had some sort of contact experience. Some of them would classify it as alien contact. Others might classify it as alien abduction. I mean, it really does cover a broad range of different experiences. But yes, I've met and interviewed several dozen of these people, and indeed, in my second book, The Uninvited, I split it into two parts. I mean, the first half is almost a kind of history of the alien contact, alien abduction mystery. But the second half, I actually pick out, I think from memory, half a dozen cases that I personally investigated and document all the details of who these people are, what they've experienced, what they believe, and it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, it takes me further outside my comfort zone than obviously the UFOs, where I can fall back on things like radar data and military eyewitness reports. But it doesn't make it any less interesting, of course. And it's one of the most fascinating aspects of the whole mystery, I think.
Oh, it is. It is. And people are fascinated by it and interested. To say that people are interested in UFOs is an understatement, I think. But that's because I travel in a circle of people who are fascinated. Why do you think people are so interested in UFOs?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. With some people, obviously, it comes from a personal experience, and I think the life-changing kind of effects of a close encounter, whether it's seeing a UFO at close range or having one of these contact experiences, can't be overstated. So in some cases, this interest comes from a personal sighting or experience. But I think for a whole lot of other people, including people who've never seen anything themselves, the attraction of this subject is, I think, that it speaks to arguably some of the biggest and most profound questions that we can ask ourselves as human beings, i.e., are we alone or not in the cosmos? Are we being visited? Is some other intelligence interacting with us? These are huge questions. These are questions, the answers to which could change everything: our science, our technology, our religious beliefs, our personal paradigms, right across the board. And I think people tend to be interested in big questions. I mean, it's all, there are plenty of little questions in life, but there are a handful of big questions. is there a God? Are we alone in the cosmos? Does consciousness survive death? And I think people are hugely interested and involved in those sorts of questions.
I agree with you, and now more so than ever, because we are in such a state of transformation and upheaval, cosmically and mundanely. I mean, you just look around the world and you see what's going on. Now, I want to kind of tie in something that everybody is talking about. They've been talking about it, and to me, it's almost okay. It's just here. Let me just ask the question, Nick. Do you believe that there is a government cover-up on this entire issue? And let's put it to rest.
Yeah, I can only really speak to what I've got direct experience of. And interestingly, I haven't come across a cover-up in the sense that I think most people in the UFO community mean it. In other words, if there is a spaceship hidden away in a hangar somewhere at some Air Force base, they didn't tell me about it. Now, maybe that means that despite having a very high security clearance, it just wasn't high enough. Or maybe it means that the Americans are the guardians of this secret and didn't share it with us Brits. So I haven't come across this kind of spaceship in a hangar, smoking gun kind of cover-up. What I have come across and have, I suppose, direct experience of is a kind of what I would call almost a soft cover-up. And I don't mean to downplay the importance of it by calling it that, but let me tell you what I mean by that and see what you think. We in the Ministry of Defense had this kind of soundbite on UFOs that we used to say that they were of no defense significance. And if we were pressed on this by the British Parliament, the media or the public, we would routinely trot out this no defense significance soundbite, and we would downplay the extent of our interest and say, oh, it's of very little concern. There's really not much work going on. We glance at these reports. We briefly examine them to see if there's evidence of any threat, but we haven't found anything of any particular significance. Now, as has been proven by the wealth of material that's come out under the Freedom of Information Act, that has been shown to be not entirely correct. I mean, after all, a subject that is of very limited interest does not generate 55,000 pages of documentation. And a study, a subject that's of no defense significance doesn't end up being the subject of intelligence studies classified secret UK eyes only. So there is what I will politely call a sort of disconnect between the public position and the private position. And I think, though I can't speak with any real degree of authority about the American position, but I think what I said about the Rendlesham Forest incident strongly suggests that there's a similar position here in America too, i.e., the public line is, oh, we're not interested anymore, we haven't investigated any of this since 1969 when Project Blue Book was wound up. Yeah. Well, if that's true, why was the senior United States Air Force general in Europe flying in and getting briefed on the Rendlesham Forest incident in 1980? So that's why I say not a spaceship in a hangar cover-up, but a sort of cover-up, or nonetheless soft cover-up, if you call it that.
I think, yes, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think we do have more of a cover-up here in the United States because Area 51 is spoken of so freely, so openly among people in the UFO community. So my feeling is it's pretty clear by eyewitnesses, by people who have been contacted that is a fact. And let's move forward with it. Let's not wait on the government to say, oh, yeah, by the way, we've covered it up. I don't think that would ever happen. So let's just move forward. And with that in mind, I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. How close do you think we are to finding alien life?
Well, I think we're pretty close. And I think you've only got to look at the sorts of statements that have been made recently by NASA, over the last few years by the Catholic Church, amongst others, to see what we seem to have got here is a bunch of people who you would normally think of as being very skeptical on this, almost positioning themselves ahead of what I think to many now seems inevitable. Now, it may be that the discovery, the announcement, however it comes, will come through the scientific community. Maybe the SETI radio astronomers will say they've detected a signal. Maybe the astrobiologists who search for exoplanets will say that they've found the chemical, biochemical signature of life. But I think I get the impression that we're getting closer and closer to this. I mean, I'm showing my age, but of course I clearly remember for many years we didn't even know for sure that there were other planetary systems around other stars. All we knew for sure was that our own sun has a planetary system. Well, now we've got thousands of these things, and it just seems to me that we're edging closer and closer to that absolute breakthrough discovery.
I agree with you. And I'd like to take the question even further. Where do you see us going? Look at your crystal ball, Nick. You have so much background. You have so much experience. Based on the research, the interviews, the information that you have, and which you have so generously shared with the world, where do you see us headed in, say, the next 10 to 20 years? That may be too far ahead. But where do you see the entire UFO field heading, UFO/alien field heading?
Well, I suspect that within 10 years we'll have scientific proof of extraterrestrial life. And if you ask me to put a bet on it, I would say that it will come through radio astronomy. And I think even if that's not what the UFO community necessarily want, I mean, after all, life out there is not the same as life down here. But I mean, I think it's a question of small moves. And once society has incorporated into its belief system, its global consciousness, the fact that we're not alone, I think it's then a much shorter step to consider the issue of visitation. So I think we need to do it through a step process. I don't necessarily think we will see, the archetypal landing on the White House lawn, nor do I necessarily suspect some sort of presidential announcement that, Roswell and Rendlesham Forest, it was all real. But what I do expect is an announcement that proof of extraterrestrial life has been discovered, and then I think we'll see how society assimilates that, and then take the next step. But I think it was very well said in the movie Contact, which is one of my favorite extraterrestrial movies of all, not least because it's actually more about us than about extraterrestrials. But the phrase is small moves, and I think it's frustrating for people who want to see some instant resolution of this. But I think it will be a case of small moves. But I think we are getting there.
I agree with you, and I agree that it's the scientific community now, which is going to probably be the vehicle through which this occurs because of the proof that science offers. And I think some people require proof. Others jump headlong into it. And I'm one of those people who, my feeling is, let's get on with it. Let's not worry about having the government say, oh, yes, by the way, yeah, there was a cover-up. Let's just move forward and give everybody the ability to discover, as you have, and uncover information that's going to affect our entire planet, hopefully beautifully and benevolently. Now, I know, speaking very, very mundanely, that you're going to be speaking at a marvelous conference, the Contact in the Desert Conference at the Joshua Tree. Please tell us about that, and will you share with us what you'll be presenting at that time?
Sure. Contact in the Desert is now really just, I suppose, a matter of a few days away. It's being held from August the 8th to the 11th, as you say, at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center in California. All the details are at their website, which is contactinthedesert.com. I mean, there are almost 40 speakers there. I mean, it really reads like a sort of who's who of the UFO and alternative belief communities. Eric von Daniken, George Noory, Jim Mars, Giorgio Tsoukalos, Linda Moulton Howe, Richard Dolan, Stephen Greer, Laura Eisenhower, Yvonne Smith. I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, this really is, I think, the biggest event of its kind in the world. It's now in its second year. I think it got about 800 attendees last year, and probably on course to get 1,000 this year. I'll be there. I'm going to be giving a presentation on the Rendlesham Forest incident. I'm also going to be doing a workshop and an intensive. I'm going to be looking at the societal consequences of first contact, and I'm also going to be looking into what we touched on a few moments ago, the whole issue of a cover-up, and I'm going to be looking at what I call the deep politics of UFOs. In addition to that, I'll be sitting on 2, maybe 3 discussion panels, looking at issues ranging from the ancient astronaut theory through to alien contact, and again, the issue of whether there's a government cover-up on any of this. So, I mean, it really does promise to be an extraordinary event. I believe it also coincides with one of the year's most spectacular meteor showers. So it's a location out in the desert which enjoys very little light pollution. So at the best of times, the view of the stars and the Milky Way is apparently spectacular. But as this added bonus, you'll get the meteor shower too. There are going to be sky watches. Inevitably, people will be out there with night vision goggles. It's going to be great fun, very interesting, and I hope to see a lot of your listeners there, and everyone will get an opportunity to interact with the speakers, to socialize with them, to ask questions, to share their own sightings, their experiences, their theories. It really is going to be a fantastic event. As I say, contactinthedesert.com for all the details.
I think it is going to be the event so far, and the list of speakers is incredibly impressive, and of course you being one of them, you add to that. What I would love to pose to you now, and I want you to you might have to think about this for a minute, but you mentioned a fascinating topic to me, how society will react to the actual first contact. Many people have been contacted. Many people have experienced contact with so-called extraterrestrials. Many people are familiar with walk-ins. They are familiar with human extraterrestrials. Some may not even know it, perhaps. But if you would use your large lens, your distant lens, and take a look at our planet, take a look at our just even our two countries, and imagine that the government or the news media, because it'll probably come from the news media, who have reported something from the scientific community, and we are our first contact, official contact, is made. Take it away from there. What do you think the effect is going to be? What do you think the response will be? I'd love to know your opinion.
Well, I think it's a very interesting but difficult question because, of course, there are a whole different range of scenarios that might unfold. I mean, do we at one end of the spectrum get spaceships kind of hanging in the skies, or do we simply get what other people might regard as something at the rather more dry end of the spectrum, just an announcement that a signal has been picked up, that there is life out there, but maybe from a civilization we would never actually meet face to face. So there are lots of variables. I'll give you what I think is the optimistic answer, because I like optimism. And the optimistic answer is that there will be a fundamental paradigm shift. People will reassess their own lives, their own actions, their belief systems, and there will be this realization that we are human beings. We're not, and what I'm saying is that all the sorts of categories that we use to define ourselves, black or white, rich or poor, Christian or Muslim, whatever, Republican or Democrat, whatever it is, we'll realize that actually those are perhaps not quite as meaningful as we thought. And we'll realize that as human beings, there is far more that binds us together than sets us apart. And so it's my hope that this is the kind of scenario that might unfold, and there'll be this what I call a coming together, that we will come to consider ourselves not in those sorts of categories, or if we do, they won't be quite as important, and that we will first and foremost come to view ourselves as citizens of planet Earth, with rights but with responsibilities too. And that's the optimistic answer. The slightly more pragmatic answer is a slightly mischievous comment made by a good friend of mine in this field, John Alexander, who was a former Army colonel who looked into this issue for the US government. And he said, well, fine, but does any of this mean we don't have to go to work tomorrow? And of course, sadly, the answer may be, yes, I'm afraid we do still have to go to work tomorrow. So I think, there's an optimistic answer, and there's a slightly more practical kind of spin on this too.
Yes. Yes. Well, of course, it's conjecture at this part, but I think that we are so on the cusp of a new Earth, on the cusp of contact, such as we have never had before, that it is very exciting to even think about it. I would never have asked that question 10 years ago, but now it really seems imminent because of all of the contactees, literal contactees, who have been in touch with what appear to be our galactic brethren. And there are all kinds of concepts and philosophies abounding now. But it's a very exciting time to be here. And I'm so grateful that you took the time from your preparation with the Contact in the Desert conference to be on my show today. I'm so grateful to you. And Nick, I want to invite you to please come back anytime because you have so much to share. Thank you, and I'm sure you're going to be remarkable at the Contact in the Desert conference. Much continued success to you, and I will continue to follow you and bask in the reflected glow of your continued success.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great to be on the show. I hope you and all the listeners have found it interesting, and I think there's plenty of food for thought there. It's a fascinating subject, and I know that people enjoy hearing about it.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much. And I hope all of you will join me again next week when, once again, we move into the magic. Till then, this is Maxine Taylor reminding you